They thought he was
Look at
broken.
this
A Navy
worthless
SEAL sent
mutt.
away to disappear. They thought his dog was just a leash they could cut.
A
But the limp was
therapy
a lie.
object.
The
What a
silence was strategy.
disgrace.
And the canine at his side was trained to stand between corruption and consequence. When they tried to take the dog, they exposed the truth. When they tried to crush the man, they brought down their own command. Honor was stolen, justice was buried, and one soldier came back to reclaim both. If you believe loyalty never breaks and truth always strikes back, subscribe to the channel for cinematic stories of courage, justice, and faith. A gray Pacific morning draped the coastal naval base in cold mist, the ocean breathing steadily beyond the perimeter fence as gulls circled overhead, their cries swallowed by the low, disciplined hum of military routine. Michael Hayes crossed the checkpoint without looking up. At 33, he moved with the restrained precision of a man who had lived too long under fire to waste energy on unnecessary motion. He stood just over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, his physique hardened by years of combat rather than training rooms. His frame carried dense, functional muscle, no excess, no softness, built for endurance, violence, and survival. His skin was weathered to a muted bronze from long deployments under harsh suns, and faint scars traced his forearms like a private map of past battles. His dark brown hair was cut regulation short, already streaked faintly with gray at the temples, and his face was sharply angled, the cheekbones pronounced, jawline strong and disciplined, a face that rarely betrayed emotion. His eyes were a steady steel blue, alert but guarded, the gaze of a man who had learned that awareness was the difference between breathing and bleeding. At his left side walked Rex. Rex was a Belgian Malinois, just under 5 years old, his coat a burnished tan, with a black mask that framed intelligent, unblinking eyes. He moved with a fluid, economical grace that spoke not of domestication, but of purpose. Every step was measured, every muscle ready, every sense tuned outward. He wore a simple red vest, identifying him as a service dog, but nothing about his posture suggested therapy. His spine was straight, his head level, his ears alert yet relaxed, the bearing of a tactical K9 trained to operate under gunfire, explosions, and chaos. He had been bred for war and shaped by it. Rex was not obedient because he was submissive. He was obedient because he understood mission hierarchy. Michael was his handler, his partner, his constant. Officially, Michael Hayes had been reassigned to the base under medical review. The transfer orders described him as a Navy SEAL recovering from compounded physical injuries and psychological trauma following a failed overseas operation. The paperwork listed chronic joint damage, stress-related symptoms, and recommended emotional support accommodations. The truth was narrower, sharper, and far more dangerous. Michael had been wounded, yes, but not broken. The stiffness in his right knee was real, a lingering souvenir from a hard landing under fire, but the rest, the hollow-eyed demeanor, the slow, measured breathing, the quiet compliance, was a deliberate performance. Grief, however, was not an act. That weight sat permanently in his chest, pressing inward with every breath. The base itself was immaculate, almost aggressively so. Buildings were painted the same sanitized sand color, lawns clipped to regulation height, walkways scrubbed clean. Discipline radiated from every surface, yet Michael felt it immediately. Something underneath was wrong. A place this controlled should feel stable. This one felt brittle. As he approached the administrative building, a pair of junior sailors glanced at Rex's vest, then at Michael's medical cane. Their sympathy was automatic, reflexive, unexamined. Michael accepted it without comment. He had learned long ago that pity made people careless. Inside, the check-in process was efficient and impersonal. A civilian clerk glanced at his file, hesitated for half a second when she reached the section marked Operational Limitations, then continued with forced professionalism. Michael signed where he was told to sign, his handwriting precise, controlled, unchanged by injury or fatigue. Rex remained seated at heel, motionless, his gaze following every movement in the room. His assigned quarters were sparse but clean, a temporary space meant for men in transition. Michael unpacked with the same methodical calm he had used in forward operating bases half a world away. Each item was placed deliberately. There were no personal photographs, no keepsakes, only essentials. Rex performed a silent perimeter check, sniffing corners, memorizing exits, then settled near the door, positioning himself where he could see both Michael and the hallway beyond. He did not relax. He never did. "This won't take long," Michael murmured, resting a hand briefly on the dog's neck. Rex leaned into the touch for half a second, then resumed his watch. The bond between them was not sentimental, it was operational, forged through shared survival. Rex had pulled Michael out of a collapsed structure once, ignoring shrapnel slicing his flank. Michael had carried Rex for 3 miles after an explosion shattered the dog's paw. Trust like that did not fade. Later that morning, Michael reported to a mandatory orientation briefing. He adjusted his gait slightly, allowing the knee to show its weakness, a subtle limp that reinforced the narrative without appearing theatrical. Rex remained close, leash loose but controlled. The briefing room was cold, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Around 20 personnel were seated, officers, senior enlisted, support staff. Conversations died the moment the door opened. Commander Richard Hawthorne entered without ceremony. Hawthorne was in his late 50s, tall and narrow, his posture rigid with authority. His hair was iron gray, cut brutally short, and his face was all sharp planes and deep lines, a face carved by years of command and unchallenged power. His pale eyes scanned the room like a weapons system acquiring targets. His uniform was immaculate, pressed to near stiffness, ribbons aligned with surgical precision. He carried himself like a man who believed deeply in hierarchy and had little patience for deviation. His gaze paused on Michael, then on Rex. The faintest flicker of disdain crossed his features before vanishing behind command neutrality. "This base is not a sanctuary," Hawthorne began, his voice dry and authoritative. "It is an operational environment. We do not lower standards here. We enforce them." Michael stared forward, expression neutral. "In recent years," Hawthorne continued, "there has been a trend toward accommodation, toward softness disguised as compassion." His eyes flicked again toward Rex. "Let me be clear. Weakness compromises readiness. Distractions compromise discipline." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. No one spoke. Michael absorbed the words without reaction. He had been dressed down by better men under worse circumstances. This was posturing, but posturing with intent. That evening, Michael entered the officers' club alone, Rex at his side. The room smelled of polished wood, old leather, and alcohol. Conversation slowed, eyes tracking him with curiosity and discomfort. He ordered water, chose a corner table. Rex disappeared beneath it, invisible but alert. 10 minutes later, Hawthorne appeared, flanked by Lieutenant Commander Paul Mercer, a thick-necked man with close-cropped blonde hair and the restless energy of someone who enjoyed enforcing rules. Mercer's grin was sharp, humorless. "Well," Hawthorne said, stopping at Michael's table, "if it isn't our recovery case." Michael rose halfway, then stopped, remaining seated but respectful. "Commander," Hawthorne gestured vaguely toward Rex, "I don't recall this base being a kennel." A few officers nearby chuckled, then quickly fell silent. "He's authorized, sir," Michael replied evenly. Mercer stepped closer, misjudging the leash, his boot brushing Rex's tail. Rex did not move, did not react. Mercer laughed. "Looks harmless enough?" Hawthorne leaned in slightly. "This is a combat installation, Chief Hayes, not a therapy retreat. We expect warriors here, not men hiding behind animals." The insult was public, deliberate. Michael felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not anger, but clarity. He met Hawthorne's gaze calmly. "With respect, sir, Rex has served longer and more faithfully than many men I've known." The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Watch your tone." "Yes, sir," Michael said, already disengaging. He finished his water, stood, and left without another word. Rex followed, silent as a shadow. Outside, the night air was cool, the ocean wind sharp. Michael walked slowly, mind already dissecting the encounter. Hawthorne was not merely arrogant, he was defensive, territorial. The base commander had felt challenged, not by insubordination, but by presence. That told Michael everything. Back in his quarters, Michael sat in the dark, listening. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his boots. Somewhere beneath the rigid order of the base, something was moving. Money, authority, fear. He could feel it. The hostility was too precise, too personal. Michael Hayes had not been sent here to heal. He had been sent here because something was rotting behind immaculate walls. And now it knew he was watching. Michael Hayes learned quickly that isolation on a military base did not come with shouting or open punishment. It arrived quietly, disguised as procedure, wrapped in polite language, and stamped with authority. Within 48 hours of his arrival, the mechanisms began to turn. His access card no longer opened the training compound before dawn. His name vanished from the weekly K-9 field rotation roster. Requests for joint drills were returned unsigned, accompanied by vague notes citing medical limitations and command discretion. No one confronted him directly. No one needed to. The message was clear. Stay visible, stay harmless, stay contained. He adapted outwardly with the same discipline that had kept him alive for more than a decade in uniform. He followed orders precisely. He attended physical therapy sessions that were shortened or abruptly rescheduled. He took Rex for measured walks along approved paths, always on leash, always within the boundaries posted on the bulletin boards. He spoke little. He nodded often. He allowed the image to settle around him like dust, the broken seal, the man who had lost his edge. Inside, the man who had survived urban raids and mountain firefights was cataloging patterns. Michael noticed the timing first. Doors that locked when he approached but opened moments later for others. Vehicles that idled too long near his quarters before moving on. Conversations that stopped mid-sentence when he entered shared spaces. None of it was dramatic. All of it was deliberate. He had lived under surveillance before. The difference here was the setting. This was not enemy territory. This was home. Rex sensed it before Michael confirmed it. The dog's reactions were subtle but consistent. When certain senior officers passed within 20 feet, Rex's ears shifted backward for a fraction of a second, his breathing deepening, his weight shifting slightly forward. Not aggression, assessment, alert. Rex had been trained to read changes in human physiology, stress hormones, altered gait, elevated heart rate, long before he learned to track explosives. These reactions were not random. They clustered around specific individuals, all of them men with authority, all of them frequenting the logistics wing. One of them was Commander Hawthorne. Up close, Hawthorne revealed details Michael had missed during their first encounters. The man's movements were rigid to the point of artificiality, as though he were constantly correcting himself. His hands shook almost imperceptibly when idle, a tremor hidden behind discipline. His face, sharp and pale, carried the faint discoloration of chronic stress beneath the skin. This was not a man at ease in his command. This was a man holding something together by force of will. Another was Captain Leonard Price, a supply officer in his early 40s with sandy hair thinning at the crown and a carefully trimmed beard that failed to hide the tension in his jaw. Price was tall but narrow, his uniform fitting him like borrowed authority. He spoke quickly, avoided eye contact, and carried himself like a man perpetually bracing for impact. Rex reacted strongly to him, nostrils flaring whenever Price passed. Michael began volunteering for night watch duty, citing insomnia. The requests were granted without hesitation. No one wanted the damaged seal visible during daylight hours. At night, the base changed character. The rigid order softened into shadow and motion. Michael walked the perimeter routes with Rex at his side, counting steps, noting camera angles, memorizing blind spots that no one bothered to update because no one expected trouble from within. It was during these walks that he noticed the humanitarian shipments. They arrived twice a week, always after midnight. Unmarked military trucks rolled through the service gate under escort, their manifests logged as relief supplies bound for overseas civilian aid. Michael never saw the contents unloaded into medical storage. Instead, the trucks diverted toward a secondary hangar near the waterline, a structure officially listed as decommissioned maintenance space. The pattern repeated too precisely to be coincidence. Michael began mapping the movements mentally. Arrival times, escort personnel, clearance signatures. Rex remained close, occasionally stopping, head tilted, ears forward, as though listening to something beyond human perception. Dogs like Rex did not imagine danger. They identified it. One night, as fog rolled in from the Pacific, Michael encountered Petty Officer Daniel Cruz near the hangar perimeter. Cruz was young, no more than 25, lean to the point of fragility, his dark hair perpetually disheveled beneath his cap. His skin was pale, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. He startled visibly when Michael approached, hand flying to his chest. "Evening, Chief," Cruz said, voice tight. "At ease." Michael replied quietly. Long night? Cruz nodded too quickly. Yes, sir. Rex sat automatically, gaze locked on Cruz's hands. The young sailor's pulse was visible in his neck. You're assigned here often, Michael observed, keeping his tone neutral. Yes, sir. Logistics support. There it was again, the word logistics. Cruz swallowed. I should get back to my post. Michael stepped aside without protest. As Cruz passed, Rex's head followed him until he disappeared into the fog. The dog released a low, almost inaudible huff through his nose. That night, Michael found his first irregularity in the system logs. Access timestamps that overlapped improperly. Cargo weights that did not align with declared contents. Serial numbers repeated where they should not have been. He photographed everything with a device disguised as a medical monitoring unit, transmitting encrypted data to a dead-drop satellite account. He did not rush. Rushing made mistakes. Mistakes got people killed. The pressure escalated. During a scheduled physical training session, a weight machine malfunctioned under Michael's hands, the pin slipping free without warning. He caught the bar before it crushed his knee, muscles straining, pain flaring sharp and real. The supervising instructor, a stocky man with a shaved head and indifferent eyes, offered a half-hearted apology and logged the incident as equipment failure. Rex growled softly, a sound so low it vibrated through the floor rather than the air. Michael calmed him with a single touch. Later that week, Michael found his quarters searched. Not ransacked, inspected. Nothing missing, everything slightly out of place. The kind of search meant to be noticed. He smiled that night as he sat in the dark, Rex's head resting against his shin. Fear made men sloppy. Sloppy men left trails. Michael's isolation extended to the mess hall. He ate alone. Conversations hushed when he sat down. The stigma attached to him had spread efficiently. No one wanted to be associated with a man the commander disliked. Michael did not resent them. He understood the instinct. He had felt it himself, once, long ago, before war burned it out of him. One afternoon, he was summoned to the logistics office under the pretense of verifying his medical restrictions. The office was overseen by a civilian contractor named Elaine Porter. Elaine Porter was a woman in her late 40s, tall and slender, her posture precise, her movements controlled. Her auburn hair was pulled back into a tight bun that emphasized the sharp lines of her face. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were a calculating gray. She wore conservative clothing, neutral colors, and carried herself with practiced professionalism. Her smile, when it appeared, did not reach her eyes. "Chief Hayes," she said warmly, "please sit." Michael did. Rex positioned himself between Michael and the door without instruction. Elaine glanced at the dog, then back to Michael. "You understand that certain areas of this base require unrestricted readiness?" "I do," Michael replied. She folded her hands. "Your presence in logistics-adjacent zones has raised concerns." Michael met her gaze evenly. "I walk approved routes." "Of course you do," Elaine said smoothly. "But perception matters." There it was, not policy, perception. "I suggest you limit your movements," she continued, "for your own well-being." Michael nodded. "Understood." As he stood to leave, Rex's ears flattened briefly. Elaine's pulse quickened. Her breathing changed. Rex did not move, but the warning was clear. Back in his quarters, Michael reviewed the data he had gathered. The picture forming was unmistakable. Funds were being rerouted, supplies mislabeled, junior personnel pressured into silence, accidents staged just convincingly enough to avoid investigation. This was not incompetence, it was structure. Michael lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The danger was no longer theoretical. It was active. Someone knew he was looking. Someone was deciding whether to scare him off or remove him entirely. Rex shifted beside him, placing his head on Michael's chest, heartbeat steady, grounding. "I see it too," Michael murmured. By dawn, he had reached his conclusion. The base was not just hiding something, it was protecting it, and the protection was beginning to crack. The order arrived without warning, slipped into the system with the same quiet efficiency that had defined Michael Hayes' isolation since his arrival. It appeared simultaneously on the base bulletin boards in the internal email network, and as a printed memorandum slid under the door of his quarters at exactly 600. Michael read it once, then again, his expression unchanged, but the muscles along his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mandatory K9 safety and stability evaluation. Immediate compliance required. Purpose: assessment of handler control animal temperament, and suitability for continued presence on base. Michael exhaled slowly and looked down at Rex. The Belgian Malinois sat upright, ears forward, eyes locked on Michael's face, reading him with the same precision he brought to explosives detection. Rex was nearly 5 now, his body fully mature, his musculature dense and elastic beneath his short coat. Old scars marked his hind leg and shoulder, pale against tan fur, reminders of shrapnel and collapsed masonry. He was calm, composed, but alert. A soldier waiting for orders. "They're coming for you," Michael murmured quietly. The trap was elegant in its cruelty. Michael recognized it instantly. They could not remove Rex outright without provoking questions, so they would manufacture concern, safety, liability, mental health, words sharp enough to cut, clean enough to justify anything that followed. The evaluation would not be designed to measure Rex's discipline. It would be engineered to make him fail. Loud noises, aggressive posturing, sudden movements. If Rex reacted, he would be deemed dangerous. If Michael intervened too forcefully, he would be labeled unstable. Either outcome severed the bond. By mid-morning, the base was buzzing with controlled curiosity. The evaluation was scheduled for Training Yard C, an open field bordered by bleachers normally used for demonstrations and ceremonial drills. This was not a private assessment. It was a message. Michael arrived precisely on time, dressed in standard utility uniform, his posture deliberately subdued, his gait still favoring the injured knee. Rex walked at heel, wearing the red vest that had become both camouflage and target. The air was sharp with salt and sun, the sky a washed-out blue that made the scene feel too exposed, too clean. Commander Richard Hawthorne stood at the center of the bleachers, hands clasped behind his back. Up close, his face revealed the strain of sustained control, fine lines around the eyes, a tightness at the corners of his mouth that never quite relaxed. His pale skin looked almost translucent in the sunlight, veins faintly visible at his temples. He watched Michael approach with the detached interest of a man observing a tool rather than a person. To Hawthorne's right stood Captain Leonard Price, his sandy hair plastered neatly into place, his beard trimmed to regulation length. Price avoided Michael's eyes, focusing instead on a clipboard held too tightly in his hands. To the left was Elaine Porter, the civilian logistics coordinator. She wore a light gray blazer despite the heat, her tall, slender frame rigid, auburn hair pulled back severely. Her face was composed, professional, but her eyes flicked repeatedly toward Rex, calculating. Several other figures were present, forming the evaluation board. Lieutenant Harold Mason, a base veterinarian in his early 40s, stood near the field equipment. Mason was average height, slightly overweight, his dark hair thinning, and his glasses sliding down his nose. His posture suggested discomfort rather than authority. He loved animals. Michael could see it in the way Mason glanced at Rex, sympathy softening his expression. A handful of junior officers and enlisted personnel occupied the bleachers, there to observe, to learn, and to report back through rumor. Public humiliation worked best with witnesses. "Senior Chief Hayes," Hawthorne announced, his voice carrying easily across the field. "As you are aware, recent concerns have been raised regarding the suitability of your support animal in an operational environment." "Yes, sir," Michael replied, voice neutral. "This evaluation will determine whether the animal presents a risk to personnel," Hawthorne continued. "Failure to demonstrate stability will result in immediate removal of the animal from base housing." Michael nodded once. Inside, his thoughts moved with lethal clarity. Hawthorne believed control equaled dominance. He believed fear could be weaponized. He had not considered that Rex had been trained to operate under worse conditions than this stage-managed theater. The first phase began with auditory stressors. Without warning, a pyrotechnics technician fired a concussion charge at the far end of the field. The crack echoed sharply, birds scattering from nearby rooftops. Michael flinched deliberately, shoulders tensing, breath hitching as though startled. Rex did not move. His ears rotated, pinpointing the source, then relaxed. He remained seated, gaze fixed on Michael's face, awaiting instruction. Hawthorne's lips pressed into a thin line. The second charge was louder, closer. Dust kicked up from the dry ground. Michael allowed his breathing to quicken slightly, sweat forming along his brow. Rex remained still, his body language composed, tail low, but relaxed. Lieutenant Mason glanced at his clipboard, then up at Hawthorne, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Proceed!" Hawthorne snapped. Phase 2 involved simulated aggression. A man stepped forward from the equipment line, introduced as Sergeant Brian Holt, a K-9 handler from another unit. Holt was in his mid-30s, broad and muscular, with a shaved head and heavy stubble along his jaw. His movements were confident, almost theatrical, his eyes bright with the energy of someone enjoying performance. He wore a padded sleeve on his left arm and heavy gloves. Holt began to circle Michael slowly, posture aggressive, voice rising. "Hey, watch your dog!" he shouted, clapping his hands loudly. He moved closer, invading space deliberately. Michael's heart rate increased, not from fear but from anticipation. He kept his hands relaxed at his sides, eyes downcast, projecting stress without resistance. Rex's body tensed subtly, weight shifting forward, muscles coiling. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He watched Holt with focused intensity, tracking movement, waiting for command. Holt lunged suddenly, shouting, his padded arms swinging wide. "Cover," Michael said softly. The command was almost lost to the wind, but Rex heard it. He moved instantly, stepping between Holt and Michael, placing his body squarely in the path of the advance. He did not bite. He did not snap. He planted his feet, shoulders broad, a living barrier. Holt collided with him unexpectedly, stumbling back a step, surprise flashing across his face. "Hey," Holt began. "Oh, hold," Michael commanded. Rex froze, unyielding, eyes locked on Holt. The dog's control was absolute. He had fulfilled his directive precisely. Protect the handler without aggression. A murmur rippled through the bleachers. Hawthorne's face darkened. This was not the outcome he had anticipated. Lieutenant Mason cleared his throat. "From a veterinary and behavioral standpoint," he began cautiously, "the animal's response is exemplary, controlled, non-aggressive." Hawthorne turned on him sharply. "We are not evaluating tricks, Lieutenant. We are evaluating risk." Elaine Porter stepped forward smoothly, her heels clicking against the concrete. "With respect," she said, her voice calm and persuasive, "the concern is not the dog in isolation. It's the handler's condition. Stress transfer is well documented." She turned to Michael, her gray eyes studying him with practiced concern. "Senior Chief, how are you feeling right now?" Michael allowed his shoulders to sag slightly. He swallowed, eyes flickering toward Rex, then away. "I'm managing," he said quietly. Rex's ears twitched at the change in Michael's breathing. He shifted, placing himself closer, his body angled protectively. Still no aggression, just presence. "There," Elaine said softly. "That response. He's feeding off your distress." Lieutenant Mason hesitated. "Or he's responding to perceived threat, which is normal." Hawthorne cut him off. "Enough. The board has seen sufficient evidence." Michael's pulse spiked. This was the moment, the false dilemma. Either he protested, revealing strength and intent, or he stayed silent and lost Rex. He did neither. Michael met Hawthorne's gaze steadily. "Sir," he said, voice even, "Rex is responding to commands as trained. If you escalate the stimuli, you risk provoking the response you're claiming to prevent." The words hung in the air, calm, professional, not defensive. Hawthorne studied him, something like irritation giving way to suspicion. Before he could respond, Rex sat automatically, posture perfect, eyes forward. The dog's discipline was undeniable. He had performed under simulated threat without deviation. The evaluation board shifted uncomfortably. The trap had not sprung cleanly. Hawthorne straightened, masking his frustration behind authority. "This evaluation is not concluded," he said coldly. "Further review will be conducted." Michael nodded. "Understood, sir." As he turned to leave, Rex at heel, Michael felt it, the subtle shift in the air, not defeat, pressure. Hawthorne had failed publicly. That made him dangerous. Back in his quarters, Michael knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Rex's. "You did good," he whispered. Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, restrained but pleased. The plan to remove Rex had cracked, not shattered. The danger was far from over. But now Michael knew something vital. They were afraid. The order that ended the silence did not come through official channels. It came through instinct. Michael Hayes woke before dawn with the same internal alarm that had dragged him out of sleep on battlefields continents away. Rex was already awake, seated upright beside the bed, head tilted slightly, ears angled toward the corridor beyond the door. Something had shifted overnight. The air itself felt thinner, stretched tight. Michael dressed without turning on the lights. His movements were smooth, practiced, no trace of the injured man he had been pretending to be. When he straightened, the limp was gone. His posture lengthened, shoulders squared, spine aligned. The mask was no longer necessary. "Time," he whispered. Rex rose instantly, tail still, body aligned at heel. Without the red vest, the dog looked different. Leaner, sharper, unmistakably lethal. His harness now was matte black, close-fitted, bearing no markings visible to casual eyes. To those who knew, it was unmistakable. Training Field C was already filling when Michael arrived. The evaluation from the day before had not settled the matter. It had inflamed it. Word had spread quickly through the base, distorted and sharpened by rumor. The commander had summoned senior staff, logistics officers, and unit representatives under the pretense of administrative clarification. In truth, it was an attempt to reassert control. Commander Richard Hawthorne stood at the center again, his face drawn tight, jaw clenched as though he were grinding something bitter between his teeth. His uniform was immaculate, but the confidence that once filled it had thinned. To his left stood Captain Leonard Price, visibly sweating despite the cool morning air, his sandy beard darkened at the edges. Elaine Porter stood slightly behind them, composed as ever, her pale gray blazer immaculate, auburn hair pinned tight, her tall, slender frame rigid with contained tension. She watched Michael with the eyes of a woman recalculating risk. In the bleachers, more people had gathered than before. Officers, enlisted sailors, base security, witnesses. Hawthorne raised a hand. "This assembly is to address concerns raised during yesterday's evaluation," he began, voice firm but edged. "We will resolve this matter decisively." Michael stepped forward without being summoned. The murmur that followed rippled outward like a shockwave. He stopped precisely 10 feet from Hawthorne, Rex seated at his left, perfectly still. "With respect, sir," Michael said, his voice calm and carrying. "This matter has already been resolved." Hawthorne's eyes narrowed. "You are out of line, Chief." "No," Michael replied evenly. "I am on mission." That word landed hard. Before Hawthorne could respond, Michael reached into his pocket and produced a slim, hardened device. He pressed a single button. The large screen mounted beside the field flickered to life. A frozen image appeared. A night vision, still of a military transport truck, entering the base under escort. Michael turned slightly, addressing not just Hawthorne, but everyone present. "My name is Senior Chief Michael Hayes, United States Navy," he said. "I am not here for recovery. I am not under medical review, and Rex is not a therapy animal." A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Michael continued, voice steady, controlled. "Rex is an active-duty tactical K-9, Belgian Malinois, 5 years old, trained for explosives detection, tracking, and close protection. He is assigned to me under Naval Special Warfare Authority." Hawthorne stepped forward, face flushing. "That's classified?" "So is this," Michael said, clicking the device again. The screen changed. Financial ledgers, shipment manifests, offshore account routing diagrams. The evidence was stark, unforgiving. Elaine Porter's composure cracked. Her lips parted slightly, breath catching. Her gray eyes flicked toward the exits. Michael did not raise his voice. He did not need to. For the past 6 months, humanitarian shipments routed through this base have been diverted. Supplies listed as medical aid were replaced with high-value contraband, antiquities, weapons components, black market assets. Captain Price staggered back half a step, color draining from his face. This is fabricated," he stammered. Michael met his gaze. "Your authorization codes appear on every altered manifest, Captain." The screen shifted again. Surveillance footage from Hangar 9, time-stamped, grainy but clear. Price was visible, clipboard in hand, overseeing a late-night load. Price's shoulders sagged. He said nothing. Elaine Porter found her voice. "This is an abuse of authority," she said sharply. "You're a single operator making accusations." "You laundered the funds," Michael said calmly, turning to her. "Shell corporations, logistics consulting fees, clean on paper. You handled the flow. You kept the books quiet." Elaine's face went pale beneath her careful makeup. She took a step back. "And you," Michael said, turning back to Hawthorne, "provided the cover, the clearances, the intimidation." Hawthorne's voice dropped to a snarl. "You have no idea what you're doing. Michael smiled then, just slightly. It was not a pleasant expression. On the contrary, sir, this is exactly what I was sent to do. He touched the device in his ear. Sentinel Actual, this is Echo 1. Phase 4 is green. The response was immediate. Movement erupted in the bleachers. Men and women who had blended seamlessly into the crowd rose in unison. They moved with disciplined speed, spreading outward, blocking exits. They wore standard uniforms, civilian jackets, nothing that screamed authority until they did. A woman stepped forward, tall and composed, her dark hair pulled into a severe knot at the base of her neck. She was in her early 40s, athletic build, olive skin marked faintly by sun exposure. Her eyes were sharp, assessing, unflinching. She wore a navy blue windbreaker, unzipping it to reveal credentials clipped to her belt. Special Agent Mar 11, she announced, voice crisp. Naval Criminal Investigative Service. The field went silent. Commander Hawthorne, Captain Price, Ms. Porter, Levin continued, you are under federal investigation for smuggling, misappropriation of military funds, and conduct unbecoming. Hawthorne lunged forward. This is outrageous! He never finished the sentence. One of the base security officers, confused and panicking, reached for his sidearm. Rex reacted instantly. He moved without sound, positioning himself between Michael and the officer, body low, eyes locked. A single bark exploded from his chest. Not rage, not fear, but command. The officer froze, weapon half drawn, shock rippling across his face. Stand down, Agent Levin snapped. The officer complied, hands shaking. Rex held position until Michael placed a hand lightly on his harness. Down, Michael said softly. Rex obeyed immediately, sitting, gaze never leaving the threat. The moment broke the last illusion of control Hawthorne possessed. NCIS agents moved in, efficient and precise. Price was cuffed without resistance, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. Elaine Porter attempted to flee, heels slipping on concrete, but two agents intercepted her within 3 steps. She screamed once, a sharp, desperate sound, before being restrained. Hawthorne stood rigid as agents approached him. I built this base, he hissed. I kept it alive. You poisoned it, Michael replied quietly. The cuffs closed around Hawthorne's wrists. The metallic click echoed across the field. As the agents led the prisoners away, murmurs erupted. Shock, disbelief, dawning understanding. The outcast had been the blade all along. Agent Levin turned to Michael. We'll take it from here. Michael nodded. Rex? The dog rose, returning to heel, posture proud, unbroken. As Michael walked away from the field, the weight lifted slowly from his chest. The danger was not over, but the truth was no longer buried. And Rex had stood exactly where he belonged, between his partner and the threat. The base did not erupt after the arrests. It went silent. The kind of silence that follows a storm when debris still hangs in the air, and no one is certain which structures will remain standing. Training Field C was cleared within minutes, the bleachers emptied by NCIS agents and base security, acting under new authority. Commander Hawthorne's name disappeared from the command directory before sunset. Captain Price's access codes were revoked. Elaine Porter's office was sealed, its glass walls reflecting nothing but absence. Michael Hayes watched none of it directly. He stood at the edge of the airstrip with Rex at his side, the late afternoon sun cutting long shadows across the tarmac. Without the red vest, Rex looked unmistakably what he was. A combat K9, lean, powerful, and composed. His black harness fitted close to his chest, his paws planted with the quiet confidence of a soldier who knew his duty had been fulfilled. Michael's posture had changed permanently now. There was no trace of the feigned injury, no downward gaze. He stood tall, shoulders squared, the discipline of the uniform finally matching the truth beneath it. Within hours, official statements were released, carefully worded, precise. The base acknowledged an internal investigation, confirmed multiple arrests, and reassured personnel that command continuity would be maintained. It was not an apology. Militaries rarely apologized, but the acknowledgement itself was seismic. That night, Michael was summoned, not as a suspect, not as an anomaly, but as an operator whose role was complete. The meeting took place in the main administrative building, a space that had once felt cold and adversarial. Now it felt stripped, neutralized. At the head of the table stood Captain Samuel Rourke, the newly appointed interim commander. Rourke was a man in his early 50s, tall and solidly built, with salt and pepper hair cut short and a neatly trimmed beard that framed a weathered, thoughtful face. His skin was darkened by years at sea, his eyes steady and clear. He carried himself without theatrical authority. The weight he bore came from experience, not ego. He had spent the better part of his career cleaning up the aftermath of compromised commands. It had left him cautious, blunt, and deeply intolerant of corruption. "It's Senior Chief Hayes," Rourke said, extending a hand. "I've read the file that never should have existed." Michael shook his hand firmly. "Sir." Rourke glanced down at Rex, then back up. "And this must be your partner." "Yes, sir." Rourke nodded once. "He performed exactly as trained. Both of you did." There was no offer of promotion, no speech, just acknowledgement. It meant more. Over the following days, the base began to heal in visible, practical ways. Restrictions were lifted, rosters corrected. Junior personnel previously buried under threat and silence were quietly reassigned or placed under protective review. Petty Officer Daniel Cruz, pale and exhausted but finally unafraid, was transferred to a new unit with his record cleared. Lieutenant Harold Mason, the veterinarian who had hesitated but not lied, was commended discreetly for professional integrity. The machinery of discipline resumed, but its tone had changed. Fear had been replaced with vigilance. 1 week later, the ceremony was held. The parade ground was immaculate, flags snapping gently in the coastal breeze. Sailors stood in formation beneath a bright, cloudless sky. There was no band, no fanfare. This was not a celebration. It was a reckoning. At the front stood an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Reynolds, parents of a SEAL whose name had been used to justify theft and silence. Mr. Reynolds was tall even in age, his back still straight, his gray hair thinning but neatly combed. Mrs. Reynolds was small, her posture delicate but unbroken, her silver hair pulled back, her face lined with quiet endurance. They held hands tightly, as if anchoring one another against memories too heavy to face alone. Captain Rourke addressed the formation. His voice carried without amplification. He spoke of duty, of command as stewardship, of the sacred trust placed in those who wear the uniform. He did not name the criminals. He did not recount their crimes in detail. He spoke instead of the harm done to families, to service members, to the idea of honor itself. Then he turned. Senior Chief Michael Hayes, front and center. Michael stepped forward. He wore his dress whites now, immaculate, every line sharp, every movement precise. At his left heel walked Rex, harness gleaming subtly in the sun. Naval Special Warfare insignia, visible but understated. The murmurs that rippled through the ranks were not curiosity now. They were respect. Michael stopped at the podium. He did not rush. He looked out across the formation, then at the Reynolds family. When he spoke, his voice was steady, measured, carrying the calm authority of a man who no longer needed to prove anything. "There are 2 kinds of honor," he began. "The kind you wear and the kind you live." He spoke of choices made in silence, of integrity tested when no one was watching, of loyalty not as sentiment but as action. He spoke of those who served and were used, and of the obligation to restore what had been taken from them. Then he turned slightly and knelt beside Rex, resting a hand on the dog's broad head. Rex remained still, eyes forward, posture perfect. "This partner," Michael continued, "was called a liability, a weakness, a distraction. He is none of those things. He is discipline made flesh, loyalty without compromise. He stands where he is told, and he does not move until the mission is complete." Michael rose and faced the Reynolds family. From the breast pocket of his uniform, he withdrew a small velvet-covered case. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a gold trident, its surface catching the sunlight, engraved on the back with a name that had been spoken too often in whispers. "This belongs with you," Michael said quietly. Mrs. Reynolds gasped softly, one hand flying to her mouth. Mr. Reynolds closed his eyes, shoulders tightening. She accepted the case with trembling hands, clutching it to her chest as though it might anchor her grief to something solid. "You brought him home," she whispered. Michael nodded once. "Yes, ma'am, we did." The ceremony ended without applause. It did not need it. The silence that followed was reverent, complete. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, Michael stood on the beach beyond the base perimeter. He wore civilian clothes now, simple, unmarked. The ocean rolled steadily before him, indifferent and eternal. Rex stood beside him, ears perked, watching the waves with relaxed curiosity. Captain Rourke approached quietly. "Your orders are open," he said. "You could stay, teach, lead." Michael considered it, then shook his head. "There are places that need us more." Rourke smiled faintly. "I thought you'd say that." As Rourke walked away, Michael knelt and rested his forehead briefly against Rex's. "Ready, partner?" Rex's tail swayed once, controlled but content. They walked down the beach together as the last light faded, silhouettes against the endless horizon. In a world still riddled with danger and deceit, one truth remained unchanged. Loyalty, discipline, and honor, lived, not spoken, would always endure. Michael Hayes did not leave with medals or headlines. He left with his name intact, his conscience clear, and his four-legged partner exactly where he belonged, at his side.